So just to get us grounded on why trust-based philanthropy. Essentially, we have in traditional philanthropy, what we see is a values to practice disconnect. And what this means is many of us who do the work in philanthropy are doing this work with really positive values that drive it. In this graphic, you're seeing, here's a message that might not be unlike the mission statement or value statement of some of our foundations in the room. Reducing barriers, advancing opportunity, building a healthy and thriving community. So we stand behind these values when we talk about the drivers of the work. However, somehow over time in our sector, we have actually built up walls that run totally counter to the values that we stand behind. So when we say that we're behind reducing barriers, advancing opportunity, building a healthy and thriving community, our practices, our grant-making practices, should ideally reflect that. However, we've been operating in a traditional landscape of philanthropy where, we're leading with a lot of distrust. There's a lot of hoops and requirements for nonprofits to go through. And it makes it very hard for nonprofits and communities to engage with our work. So if we truly do stand behind these positive values, it's really important for us to think about how those values are reflected in the way that we practice our grant making. And that what we do in trust-based philanthropy is invite a re-envisioning and a reimagining and a realigning of recognizing how our grant making practices can be reflective of the values behind the work rather than countering the values behind our work. So this is the definition of trust-based philanthropy, which you may have seen. It's really fundamentally about addressing inherent power imbalances that exist between funders, nonprofits, and the communities served. So the core of what we're talking about is about redistributing power and being really self-aware about our role and our positionality in redistributing that, ultimately toward a vision of a healthier and more equitable nonprofit sector. So we'll talk about the practical expressions of this in grant making, but it really, some of the core practices are multi-year unrestricted funding, streamlined applications and reports, and a commitment to building relationships based on transparency, dialogue, and mutual learning. And you'll hear some great examples of that today. The other thing to note about trust-based philanthropy is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It does not look identical in every organization. One of the things that really does that is the common denominator across organizations committed to trust-based philanthropy is a values-based approach. And we talk a lot, we've been hearing a lot about kind of values, aligning values to practice. Values are essentially the fundamental beliefs that guide your organization's work. In a trust-based context, your values are your North Star for decision-making. If you ever have a moment of uncertainty, moments of change, values become the fallback of what you go back to as the guide and the compass for how you can work through that. Values are also really positive and useful way of aligning people around a shared vision, both internally and externally in your organizations. Many of us have centered values, have done this values work in our organizations. We have value statements on our websites. And the point is to think about how can we be intentional about having a collective understanding about what those values are and using those values to drive our work. So while not every trust-based foundation will have the exact same language verbatim on what their values look like, many of the values will allude to some of these things that you see on the screen. And these values that we've collected have been collected based on conversations with a range of different foundations that have committed to the trust-based journey. We actually went to a community of different funders that have committed to this journey and asked them, what are the values that drive your work? And these were the kind of common themes that came up.